aggression. To two, identify the level of aggression that police officers express towards members of various ethnic groups. And three, determine whether or not vocally expressed aggression can be used as a means of predicting physical violence. And so the ultimate goals of the project were, just to summarize all those things into something that was very concise, we have to rein in police misconduct in real time before it results in loss of life, because we can predict violence via, predicting someone's state of mind. That would, needless to say, prevent loss of life. And then two, to further assure the safety of all people who have encounters with police officers. And so we feel that, this protects citizens from, let's say, biased encounters by presenting like an unbiased audience. And then on the police side, it protects them because, it protects them against, let's say, false accusations. When you can keep track of their mental state, you can keep track of the fact that, they were less likely to have, engaged in a certain activity that was not conducive to proper conduct. So with that said, I'll pass it off to data collection.
Yeah, so in terms of how we gathered our data, we basically obtained body camera footage from YouTube and then split each video into short clips to be annotated. As a quick note, though, we did notice some bias due to the fact that most body camera footage that is released on YouTube is from interactions that are under investigation for misconduct. So more of our videos were aggressive than in the actual population of like all police interactions. So that's just something to keep in mind.
And now I will talk about how we did.
Moving on to data preparation. I believe that's you, Zoe?
Yes. Yeah, and I will talk about data preparation. So since we're dealing with the video data and the sound data, so we built an API to annotate it. We use the streamline from the Streamlit and develop a UI Streamlit that is directly connected with our data pipeline with the Azure storage that we can collectively work on. And we use this tool to annotate on aggression level, emotionality, demographic data, and whether they use weapon or camera in the video. And we standardize our scaling for categorical data like emotion and aggression using Yudovsky's overt aggression level. Can I get to the next PowerPoint? Thank you. And here is a brief data overview for our collected data. So we can see that for ethnicity, white composes about 75% for police ethnicity, but it only composes less than 50% for citizen ethnicity. But for both police and citizen, male is like dominantly more than the female. And next, let's talk about some data modeling that we already built.
All right. So one of the models we tried, one of the algorithms we tried was decision tree. Using a decision tree, we were able to achieve 80% accuracy when we tested on testing data. So here's a snippet of the decision tree we built.
And then basically building off of the decision tree to identify aggression, we built a random forest classifier, which is essentially an ensemble of many decision trees. So it did result in a higher accuracy and precision compared to any individual tree. And there was lower precision for the aggressive clips, which you can see as 1, meaning that we were classifying some clips that were as aggressive when in fact they were not, but overall it did result in better results than any individual tree. And then looking at this bar plot, you can see the importance of each feature in our model, basically because we wanted to understand which features were the greatest indicator of aggression. And essentially we found that maximum amplitude as well as RMS were, which makes sense given that those tend to indicate aggression.
And then on to time series modeling, because of the nature of aggression, it accumulates over time. We felt that time was a dimension that we needed to explore. But because our time series, we had several time series that ran in parallel with one another, like a bunch of different small samples for each video. We needed to explore new methods of creating a time series model. So I created a multivariate logistic regression model that used time windows. And we found that aggression tends to be present biased, meaning that aggression is very volatile. And though it did have some correlation with past events, it didn't have a strong correlation, meaning aggression tends to be pretty explosive and in the moment. And then again, we found that maximum amplitude, RMS, and saliency were just a few of the spectral features that contributed a lot to predicting aggression. And then the next slide. And then here's just RMS and aggression value over time. There seems to be a pretty strong positive correlation between the two, which makes sense because RMS measures the how loud you are. So usually when you're aggressive, you tend to be louder.
So in summary, this semester we spent a lot of time collecting and annotating data. Our result were based off limited data set, but however, we achieved better result than we expected given the limitation. With that, going to hand back to Kaylin, talk about future steps.
So we saw this semester, as a great proof of concept. We wanted to see whether or not vocal features could be used to predict aggression. And, given that each of our models had higher accuracy than 80%, we felt like it definitely was. We're incredibly excited to continue this project next semester, where we're going to look more at the general relationship between the voice and emotion. And we're going to be able to utilize pre-existing data sets, one, for example, from UPenn, and we hope to train a recurrent neural network, which should allow us to utilize time data and ultimately create a model that allows for live inputs so that we can create this early warning system. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
What are some of the limitations of your approach? And that's not to critique your approach, but rather, like, what are some things that maybe would skew your results? I know you talked a little bit about it, but if you could say more, that'd be cool.
I think that for us, a major limitation was that we had to manually annotate some of the features. And so since it was just like a group of 5 of us, that just limited the amount of data we could have. And then also, I know I mentioned this earlier, but just the fact that we were using publicly available body camera footage, which tends to limit the types of body camera footage you obtain, because most body camera footage is actually private to police departments. So I think those are the main limitations that we had. If anyone else has any other thoughts, chime in.
And also another limitation is like, it is really hard to find a large amount of data that can fit in our feature engineering, because like once we grow a feature, we need like exponentially more data on that. And also sometimes we are scratching data from a YouTube list, and sometimes like all the videos from the same YouTube list share some common features that might be a bias for our data pool.
Additional to that, I'd say was aggression in itself. There aren't many approaches to ways you can annotate it. So it took a lot of research to find ways that other people have done in the past. So we used Yudovsky's overt aggression scale, which is used a lot in clinical psychology, but applying it to data science was something kind of new. I'd definitely say I think we can all agree that the annotation process was pretty arduous and took a long time to manually do these things. On top of the fact that we were working with audio data for the first time, I think a lot of us, which was really fun and exciting, but also presented new challenges, like the quality of the audio needs to be good, so that you can actually extract like maybe what's being said, or
yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. What do you think might be the ethical implications or sort of some of the potential ethical problems that might come up in utilizing this approach more broadly?
I think a lot of the ethical questions that might be raised would follow along the lines of, when they told police officers to wear body cameras. At that time, that was a really jarring idea. It was an invasion of privacy. It was, you were telling them how to do their jobs, and it was, there was a whole giant lobbying effort to make sure that didn't happen. But for me, when I see this, I don't necessarily think that it's that much of a step above existing technology. I just think that it provides a bit more of a window into making sure that the officers have the right state of mind. So in terms of regulating our public servants to say, like, okay, if you're going to be handling the public, you should be of a of sound mind when you're making sure you're taking care of people in the proper way. And we should make sure that you're not coming into a situation with implicit biases. So in that way, I don't think that it presents a lot of ethical issues in terms of the civic effect that it can have, which I feel is overwhelmingly positive. But in terms of the privacy of the officers, again, that argument could be made because it is a ramping up of the kinds of body camera technologies that already exist. So.
Yeah, I would say, or sorry, I was just going to say, if anything, something I thought about was like the fact that female and male voices, for example, are definitely different. So when you do it in real time, it's potential bias that if most of our data was, for example, male police officers, which I think it was, that we would potentially we would assess like males and females differently or anything like that.
Yeah, we would love to have more questions. Unfortunately, just due to time, we need to move to the next team. But totally welcome to stay after and chat as well. It's a really big topic space. So yeah. Next is on exploring spaces and places of violence against homeless youth.
I should probably unmute myself if I'm going to present. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, wonderful. Hello, my name is Jack. We did examining spaces of violence against youth experiencing homelessness in San Francisco. Our research mentor was Alan Ratliff. And with us, contributors, we have Eva, Sandra, Shirley, and myself, Jack. Now, as a basic introduction, the SFER research study is a qualitative geospatial study of violence, safety, and access to basic needs for youth experiencing homelessness. The study conducted 45 semi-structured walking interviews in San Francisco with youths aged from 15 to 24 who had experienced homelessness in the previous 6 months. These youths were recruited from street sites and programs in 5 diverse neighborhoods. And the primary goal was to analyze how places affect access to basic needs and safety. Our hope for this study is it'll help inform local policymakers and service providers. And the introduction to the data, we ended up having a huge amount of very different data. We had hand-drawn maps, which were drawn on paper by participants during interviews. We had field move photos, which were photos taken using the Field Move app. This allowed us to tag them with indicator information and coordinates. We had a qualitative text database, which was qualitative analysis done from the transcripts and tagged with locations, and then Field Move virtual map data, which were basically just annotations on a map done on an iPad. And our big challenge was converting all this very different data into one unified database of information. Each row would have a geometry of a specific area, and the features of that row would be indicator variables where the participants indicated if an area was safe, unsafe, or a place to find resources. There are many other features in the data set, but for the sake of time, we're limiting it to the broad categories. And then Shirley.
So one of our issues was with merging the data for the qualitative text and field move photos. They had inconsistent latitude, longitude values, different columns and duplicate data. So what we did was, what we realized was that these latitude and longitude inconsistencies came up due to different API usages. And what we did to mark duplicates was we split up each data set by the interview and manually identified them based on matching the latitude, longitude values up to the second and third decimal point, and then also by interview context. So like what Jack had said earlier with like the indicator variables. Next slide.
Before merging the data, a main focus was ensuring that the hand-drawn map database was clean and prepared. This consisted of manually going through hand-drawn map images and interview transcripts to confirm the location and features for each interview. So in this example of a hand-drawn map, we notice a different perception of space. The perceived layout has all the streets parallel, yet in actuality, Golden Gate Street actually intersects Market Street, as seen in the actual layout of SF. This is just one of many examples demonstrating how the hand-drawn maps were not accurate to how space was organized. Next slide. These are other examples of hand-drawn maps, which demonstrate once again the different perceptions of space, whether it's in 2D or 3D. They're not uniform, and there are inconsistencies with SF's actual layout, which is why there requires domain-specific knowledge to interpret these maps correctly. An example would be interpreting the third map below, which demonstrates a lake labeled as Hep C Pond. Hep C is a slang term used by a participant and is well known by SF locals to describe Alvord Lake. Google Maps was used to find the location of this lake, which is near Golden Gate Park. Next.
In the interviews, participants would often refer to areas as safe or unsafe. Our original plan had the database set up to handle point coordinates. In order to maintain truth to the source, we reworked the final database to rely on polygons for geometries instead of points. We used hand-drawn maps, interviews, and domain knowledge to build geometries for these areas referenced by participants. These included streets, parks, neighborhoods, and other commonly referenced areas such as the Panhandle or the Tenderloin. The data was exported into a shapefile for later reference.
Our goal was to create a dashboard of visualizations to help local politicians and policymakers make better informed decisions regarding allocation of resources for homeless youth. Using a subset of our data, we created a core path that will represent our future visualizations of safe and unsafe points labeled by the participants. This helps visualize the distribution of safe and unsafe areas reported by census tract. Next slide. This is an interactive map of points that had photos with the interviewer's description entailed with them, and the user can click to visualize these photos. As their study reaches its completion, we intend to continue working with programs like Larkin Street Youth Services to help communicate the needs of the youth that they're working with.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
I have another question. Just want to say also, like, this is an awesome project. I'm really excited to see that this is going so well and that you all are so passionate about it. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of the ethical implications of the choices that you made in data cleaning, such as like taking point data and moving it into polygon data. Like what kind of meaning does that kind of connote?
Yeah, this was actually one of our bigger problems, and it's still something that we're tackling right now. Originally, when we had point data, it was nice because we didn't have to make these decisions about how we were going to represent the data. But it didn't actually make sense if a participant said something along the lines of, hey, this bench in this park is safe. It doesn't mean the bench is safe and the floor is lava, everything around it is dangerous. So in trying to create these polygons, we create a buffer zone around these areas, trying to better represent their meaning. However, there are ethical issues about trying to figure out what exactly they meant without really having access to them and having just these transcripts to work from. So yeah, there's some issues with that. I'm not sure if people want to add more in terms of concerns.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oh, and to add a little bit more onto that, people would often describe things like the mission, and the boundaries of the mission depend highly on who you're talking to. Like we have a general idea that 16th and mission is definitely inside the mission, but like where does it end? So we based it on the neighborhoods that San Francisco actually uses. The city of San Francisco puts out these shape files for these neighborhoods, and then trimmed it based on knowledge about the knowledge about the population Alan was able to provide for us.
One question from my end, any future plans to kind of double back to the interviewees and see how they kind of feel or react to, this data that you've collected and these like images and stuff? I imagine that it might be cool for them to, see what other people are designating safe, unsafe, etc., and see how their data has been transformed.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We're providing these results to the youth advisory groups. The data itself, we don't have any sort of contact information or even like the names of the participants. So it's like stripped of personally identifying information. We wanted to make sure that it was ethical, that it couldn't come back to hurt these people that we're serving. So going back personally isn't really something we can do as easily.
Gotcha. That's all the time we have for this one, but thanks. Really awesome presentation. Next is the group dynamics.
Yeah, I can share my screen right now. Can everyone see this? Yeah, okay. Sounds good. So hey everyone, we are the Reddit Dynamics team, and we're each going to introduce ourselves before our section. My name is Nikhil, and I am a junior majoring in Econ Business. So basically, Reddit contains a number of subreddits or communities and complex human interactions in the form of text. The goal of this project is to basically find a way to predict a user's commitment to their subreddit based on their actions and history on the platform. Our long-term goal is to actually apply this model to a complete Reddit dataset for use in further research. So to actually get this data at first, we first sent out a survey on Reddit to measure commitment from a number of users on a sample of the subreddits. So this is an example of part of the survey. We basically sent this out on a multitude of subreddits and collected responses from users. We then used the PushShift API to extract all the posts and comments for these target users and reformatted them into discussion trees. So we then stored these as CSVs. So at the moment, we have a labeled data set of a user's data as well as their measure of commitment. So I'll now pass it on to Sam to talk more about featureization for the model.
Thank you, Nikhil. Hi, my name is Samuel Ling. I am currently a data science senior here at Berkeley. And my role in the project was analyzing the features that we gathered from all of this data. So we have a number of features that I want to look at. These are the big ones. So the first one is the submissions, which is the number of comments and posts that each user submits to the Reddit platform. The word count of each of these posts and comments. The length, which is also basically the age of their account, how long they've been on the platform. And we also use the TextBob library to gather sentiment scores, which is the polarity, also the positivity of somebody's words, or the subjectivity / objectivity. And we also took out parts of speech tags that would be later useful for our model. Next slide, please. So I just want to take a moment to give a general overview of how each of these features stack up to the commitment scores that we surveyed. As you can see, there's varying degrees of variance across the board. But one particularly interesting one that I want to bring your attention to is the bottom left one, which is the commitment scores versus the polarity means. If you look at the slightly increasing, you can see a slightly trend upwards in polarity with higher commitment scores, which means that people who are a lot more committed or a lot more active in their respective subreddits tend to have more positive words to share, which is a really cool association to see reflected in the data. And now I want to pass it off to my project partner, William, to talk about the model. No, Jasmine, actually.
So hi everyone, my name is Jasmine and I'm a junior studying data science and psychology. We want to apply the model to the entire Reddit data set. And we start off by doing exploratory data analysis on all of the Reddit data. Through BigQuery, we were able to extract all subreddit comments from 50 subreddits that had 10,000 comments or more. Next slide. We applied text blob sentiment property to get the polarities of all the comments from the Reddit data we extracted. On the left, you can see that even though there's like variation within the polarities, all 20 sampled subreddits actually have a positive polarity. And on the right, the spread of the polarities for the sampled subreddits, that's the spread of it. And as you can see, the distribution is leptokurtic near an average polarity of 0.1, and that there's a lot of variation for polarity. Now I'll pass it to William.
Hi, I'm William. I'm a senior majoring in data science and political science. So I was responsible for taking the data, creating a data processing pipeline, and then at the end of that pipeline, we had a cross-validated lasso regression model that predicted commitment from comment level features, as well as user level features. So for comments, that included the subjectivity and polarity of a comment, as well as the parts of speech, the word count, and we're hoping to include TF-IDF features, so back and forth model as well. And so without the addition of the specific words, we are only able to achieve an RMSE of 0.7, which, given that this is a 5-point scale, we definitely have room for improvement. But we're pretty confident that with the additional features, we'll be able to have a higher accuracy.
Hi, I'm Cameron, and I'm a senior studying data science. I was tasked with researching retention rate as it pertains to our data. So the way we calculated retention rate for each month is we took the total number of people that commented in 1 month, and we calculated what percentage of those people also commented the following month. And so after calculating that across 50 different subreddits for each month, we were able to generate this heat map. You can see on the y-axis, we have each subreddit, and on the x-axis, each month in the year. And the sort of gradient bar on the right of the graph denotes how high the retention rate was, lighter colors corresponding to like higher retention rate and darker colors corresponding to lower retention rate. And you can see a lot of interesting things going on, such as London having a super high retention rate in February, or the NBA sort of picking up retention rate right around where the playoffs start occurring. And we thought this was an interesting metric to consider because we think it's pretty highly correlated with user commitment.
Yeah, so to conclude our presentation, we were able to successfully extract data for samples and begin developing a model to predict commitment, as well as doing exploratory data analysis on the entire Reddit dataset. So we aim to further develop our model next semester and actually apply it on this other data. To conclude, thank you to the Discovery Program for this opportunity, and to Dan for being a great mentor. I guess if anyone wants to contact us or ask questions after today's presentation, feel free to reach out with the information below. So yeah, does anyone have any questions right now?
Yeah, I do. What do you think could be the potential impact of your findings? I know you said you wanted to hand over what you discover for further research. Do you think this research will be applied in some sort of way, or how would you like it applied?
Yeah, so I guess the main reason we're doing this project is because we want to get a sense of like what constitutes group association and what constitutes like someone being committed to a group. So we're starting off with this Reddit data set because we have all this information like clearly laid out. All the text is there. For further research, I guess further applications in whether people feel part of their group, for example, at like a company level, at like a school group level, there's a lot of applications there in like business and sociology, I guess. So moving forwards, once we have like these commitment scores, we can potentially use that for further analysis later.
Yeah, kind of building off what Nikhil is saying, because we're working with text data, especially if you work with like larger samples of text, you can build a fairly robust like content to commitment model, and then you can use that to then be like, okay, if like in a corporate environment, you can be like, okay, this person has a very high commitment based off of how they're engaging through text, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like it has a lot of really cool applications. That's why I asked. Yeah, great job.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, y'all. Next up, we've got protein this prediction.
Hi, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
Can you see my pointer as well?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Ananya, and I'm joined by my teammates Jason, Chiwen, Samiha, and Samantha, and we're going to be talking about the identification and classification of intrinsically disordered regions in proteins. So to start off, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context around proteins. So proteins are chains of amino acids that can contain ordered and disordered regions. While ordered regions in proteins have rigid structure, disordered regions do not have a stable conformation due to their lack in a hydrophobic core and a high proportion of charged and polar amino acids. Intrinsically disordered proteins play an important role in many cell functions, such as cell signaling and repairing. Many disordered regions are also conserved and thus considered as evolutionary signatures. So in developmental biology, stem cells serve as the foundation and turn into different types of cells like nerve cells, red blood cells, muscle cells, liver cells, and so on. So the process of the stem cells turning into these more specialized types of cells is governed by DNA transcribing into RNA, which is translated into protein. And transcription factors play a key role in this process and often contain highly disordered regions. But despite their importance, disordered regions are very poorly understood.
While we do know that disordered proteins play an important role in the development and are evolutionary signatures, the lack of a stable conformation makes it hard for us to learn about the functions of the protein of these disordered regions. Thus, through this project, we hope to identify the key chemical features of intrinsically disordered proteins and therefore to classify them as order or disorder. And to provide a general overview of how we develop the model, we first acquire and visualize our data for validation, and then we evaluate existing models as well as develop our own models for a comparison of their performance. So first, we download two different data sets from Disprot. Disprot is a database of this order proteins that have been previously identified in research. So we have two databases. The Disprot database contains the protein sequence itself, as well as many other features, such as the specific functions of a specific region. On the other hand, the consensus database contains labels of the protein sequences that identify each region as order or disorder based on past findings. And before we use the data, we remove the unnecessary features from the Disprot database and also convert the classifications into binary numbers for the consensus database. And then after this initial data cleaning, we have roughly 1,400 protein sequences and their respective label sequence. And these data will be used for evaluating existing models as well as developing our own model. So next, we visualize the key characteristics of our data. And first, in the first graph, we were able to confirm that all protein sequences have disorder contents. And then in the second graph, we also observe a positive trend between the length of the protein and the disorder
length of the protein. And this tells us that the protein complexity could be a feature to look into in our later study.
Graph 3 gives the total count of each amino acid across the data set, where the color indicates if that residue is ordered or disordered. Graph 4 is another bar chart that gives the amino acid enrichment, where positive values indicate that there are more disordered residues for that amino acid. So taken together, they indicate that counts for each amino acid could be a useful feature. Okay, so for each amino acid, we calculated a proportion of each feature within a 15 residue window. The composition scores were motivated by our earlier data validation, and the physicochemical property scores were motivated by how amino acids interact to fold into 3D shapes. So after centering the data, we used principal component analysis to generate a scree plot, and then we looked at which features had more significant weights. However, from our analysis, almost every feature had a significant weight, so we ended up using all of our features in our later model.
So after looking at all the features, we also looked at published predictors in order to have a benchmark. Many published predictors that we aimed to evaluate had little documentation and contained software bugs. So we ended up evaluating 2 existing predictors. One that used a bidirectional recursive neural network trained on X-ray crystal structures of the proteins, and the other using interresidue interactions. We'll be comparing the performance of our final model with these existing predictors in the next slide.
So after considering the trade-offs and advantages of different frameworks, we decided to construct our model as a deep learning neural network in Keras. This was trained and validated on the previously discussed disprod data. And the model predicts residuals as being disordered or ordered based on an input of 38 different features of the residual. Preliminary tests seem to show that our model has similar performance to the benchmarks we evaluated.
Since most existing predictors are inaccessible, we created an accessible, robust machine learning network to predict disordered regions in proteins. Disordered regions are not only important transcription factors, but are also the main reason for protein misfolding. This aggregation of misfolded proteins can cause cancer and neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. By classifying these disordered regions in proteins, this would help us create model treatments for these diseases and help us understand how people are genetically predisposed to these diseases during the cell differentiation process that we had mentioned in the beginning.
Due to the time constraints we operated under, we would very much like to revisit and flesh out certain portions of the project in the future. For instance, we would like to do a more in-depth study of the features used to describe the proteins and perhaps develop more features which can be used. We would also like to explore the use of different architectures for our model, which might be more applicable to our problem and give better performance. We would also like to evaluate our model on different protein databases to get a better idea of how it performs on more general data. We'd also like to go back and try to get some more of the published disorder predictors working so we can get a more comprehensive benchmark, which we can compare our model to. To conclude, we would also like to acknowledge our advisor, Mark Singleton, and the data discovery team for providing us with this great opportunity and experience.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'll start. First of all, really cool presentation, really cool results as well. I'm kind of curious on your own personal hypotheses for why your model does better than a lot of the existing benchmarks, even the ones that really complicated models like recurrent neural nets and stuff like that. What do you think y'all did better?
Jason, you can definitely add on to this, but yeah, I think a lot of it was due to the way that we structured the model, and also like how many epochs we trained it on. So we did a lot of training. So definitely our model is not as quick to perform as some of the other predictors, but I think Jason will also talk more about why our model performs this way.
Yeah, the other thing is also the data we used is from the disprod database. That's experimentally verified disordered regions in proteins. A lot of the published predictors are going to be using some of the data they use. It's not going to come from experimental data. It comes from like different methods like X-ray crystallography type stuff, which is a little more doubtful whether that's actually like a disordered region or not. So yeah, that's just that.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah, well, if there are no more questions for now, I guess this kind of ends our student presentations. Really thankful to all of y'all, first of all, for hard work throughout your semester and putting all this together. Really thankful to all the attendees for coming. And, you know, if you'd like to get in touch with any of the projects, any of the people who worked on the projects, definitely shoot Arlo an email or, you know, leave your email in the chat if you have like any particular project you're interested in talking to. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Congrats, everybody. Great work.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.